Morning. So I'm going to introduce you to Houston, but most of you know Houston. Houston's been with us for 2 summers now as an intern. And I want to put this morning in a little bit different context. We've seen Houston preach before. He's done devos for us, but primarily he's working with our young people. And so if you're not a family with young children or one of the younger members of the congregation, you haven't spent much time with Houston, and I would encourage you to do that. We have a VBS coming up, and that'll be a great way to see the results of his work, and a lot of other people too, right? But I do want to let you know, so he's been with us 2 years. He will be graduating after this next year at Lipscomb. His degree is in ministry, but he's also doing minors in Greek and in preaching. So we'll see an example of that here shortly. And the elders are considering him as a permanent part of this congregation when he graduates. So with that in mind, while we worship God and we listen to his sermon, I would like you to be thinking about this as audition. No pressure, Houston. But I do want to raise this to a conscious level because the elders are thinking about this, and we want to sooner rather than later make a decision so that he can plan the rest of his life appropriately. So, thank you.
All right, pressure on. Okay. They told me when I was going to preach today that it was because Todd has been, in the hospital and been having some hard times. I didn't know they were just giving him his birthday off. And apparently an audition too, which I didn't know that either. But, I tease Todd a lot, but I love Todd. We're very happy to have you back. Happy birthday too. So, all right, well, let's get started with my audition, right? Sometimes we get something we need, but it's not always something we want, right? We all had the uncle or the aunt who always gave us socks and underwear for our birthday every single year. We all had one of those, right? We never wanted the socks or the underwear. We wanted some crazy toy or some new piece of clothing, but we got the socks and the underwear. Looking back, we're kind of thankful because we needed socks and underwear. Most of mine have holes in them, as Lisa, who's done my laundry, can tell you. But it's never something we want, but it's always something we need. And that very aspect is something we're going to see in our story today. If you would, turn with me to 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 16. We didn't have a Bible reading this morning because I'm going to make you all do it with me. So 1 Kings 18, verse 16. Now, while you're turning there, prior to this story, Israel has come out of Egypt. They've made it to the Promised Land. They've kind of denied God as their king, and they've asked for another king. God gave them Saul, and then they had David, and they had Solomon. But now Israel as a nation is in complete disarray, complete chaos, because they've turned their back on God and started worshiping other gods. And they're in this civil war where there's so much pain, so much suffering, so much violence, and there's God, on top of this, God has put a drought and a famine in place because they've completely rejected him and turned away from him. But at the same time, God in his love and God in his mercy has raised up for Israel a prophet named Elijah, a prophet who would go before Israel, sharing with them God's words. And they were going to be words that they didn't want to hear, but that they needed to hear. In context of the story that we're just about to get into, Ahab is king of Israel, and Ahab is the most powerful man in this region at this time, and arguably one of the most powerful men in the world at this time. And Ahab's kingship, his reign over Israel, has been dotted with the institutions of Baals, of Ashtoreth, and all these other false gods. And on top of that, him and his wife have killed off every single prophet of the one true God, except for Elijah. And against that, here we have Elijah, this simple man that doesn't have too much going for him other than the fact that he has God on his side. And that is all he needs. And Elijah has evaded the king. The king is irate at Elijah because Elijah's the one that told him about the famine, that told him about the drought. And so he blames Elijah for all this stuff. But Elijah is simply doing what God commands. And now Elijah has come face to face with the king because he has this message, again, for the king that doesn't want to hear it. So if you read with me, this is 1 Kings 18, verse 16. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah. When he saw Elijah, he said to him, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" "I have not made trouble for Israel," Elijah replied, "but you and your father's family have. You've abandoned the Lord's commands and have followed the Baals. Now summon the people from all over Israel to meet me on Mount Carmel, and bring the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Ashtoreth who eat at Jezebel's table." Now, in 2012, every year they have the National Day of Prayer, right? And they have a breakfast, and they will have speakers. And the speaker at the National Day of Prayer breakfast in 2012 with Obama's administration was this man named Eric Metaxas. And this man, he comes in, and a lot of times they just go with this real simple message, like, we're doing so great, God is love, love one another. And this man goes up before the President of the United States, who's arguably the most powerful man in the world, and after a few minutes of talking, he says, let's not fool ourselves. God is not happy that we're letting babies be killed before they're born. Let's not fool ourselves and think that God is happy that people are starving on our streets. Let's not fool ourselves that God is happy that people are dying around the country so we can serve our own interest. And whether you agree with those things or not, because I am not a political person, I do not want to get into that at all, the bravery it takes to go before some of the most powerful men in the world and say, this is a message of God, and God is not happy, takes so much courage. And that is exactly what Elijah has just done in this passage we read. He says, "O king, the brokenness in our culture, the failings of our spirituality, the suffering of our people is indirectly related to your leadership as king." Because when people stop following God and start living for lesser things, they never go alone. When they stop living for God and start living for lesser things, they never go by themselves. You can look at a group of people, I've seen it happen before, and have one person become complacent for Christ, become apathetic, have a hard-heartedness towards their faith, and it's only a matter of time before they start dragging everybody else in that group down with them. And Elijah points this out to the king and says, this suffering, this pain, all these problems we're having in our nation is directly related to your leadership as king. But let's keep reading a little more. This is verse 20. So Ahab sent word throughout all Israel and assembled the prophets on Mount Carmel. Elijah went before the people and said, "How long will you waver between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal is God, follow him." But the people said nothing. So first Elijah goes to one of the most powerful men in the world and insults him and says, God is not happy with you. But then he also goes to the people. We see Elijah is an equal opportunity offender. He offends the king and then he offends the people as well. And he lets them know that while their leadership may be bad, while their company may be bad, they cannot blame the pain that they're in, the suffering they're in, the direction they're going on simply their leadership. It is just as much in their hands as it is their king. But we like to blame people. Humanity likes to blame people. Mankind likes to blame people. We've been doing it since the beginning. You look at one of our very first stories in the Bible, Adam and Eve. After they eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they get confronted by God, the first thing Adam does is he blames his wife, and he kind of blames God a little bit too. He goes, "This woman that you gave me this fruit to eat." And then Eve blames the snake, and then we've been blaming each other for things over and over again since. We have to, if we want change, if we don't want to be going down a wrong path, if we don't want, to be in this pain and suffering, there comes a point where we have to recognize that a good bit of this is in our hands, and that we have to take that, and we have to move, and we have to turn around and take responsibility. And that's actually exactly what Elijah tells the Israelites here. Yes, your king is putting up Baals. Yes, your king is murdering the prophets, but you are not fighting it. So, and we read some more. Verse 22. Then Elijah said to them, I am the only one of the Lord's prophets left, but Baal has 450 prophets. Get 2 bulls for us. Let them choose one for themselves, and let them cut it into pieces and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and put it on the wood, but not set fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, the God who answers by fire. He is God. Then all the people said, what you say is good. You know, I like this part a lot. I don't know. I like sports a lot, and so to me, this is just like this Old Testament showdown between gods. You know, Yahweh, the one true God, and then the Baals and the Ashtoreths, and it's just they're going to be pit one against each other. You know, we know how this story ends. We've had this Bible. You probably have heard this story before. You know that it goes on, so you know who wins, right? But this is a story. Let's try to picture ourselves in this story. Let's try to vision this happening. Elijah's not in a good place right now. He's on a mountain with this whole army, with all the 450 prophets of another god, with the king's god, too, which was a big deal to them. And he's saying, let's have a showdown between gods. Me versus all of you. You know, it doesn't look good for Elijah. Elijah's the underdog. And, you know, so often in the Bible, God uses the underdog. And I love that. You know, you look at Noah, Moses, Gideon, David. These are all underdogs. But I think he uses the underdogs for a lot of reasons. One of them is when you use the underdog and you win, you know that he didn't do it by himself. Usually God's hand is there, and you can see that because he's not the favorite one. If 450 prophets and the king and all them win, well, yeah, there are 450 prophets and the king. But if one man against all them win, you can see God's hand moving in there. And also, it shows that God uses these imperfect people. I'm an underdog. You're an underdog. We're fighting this world full of sin. We're fighting our lives full of sin. God uses the underdogs. And I just always, every time I run across that, it's just so encouraging to me. Verse 25. Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, choose one of the bulls and prepare it first, since there are so many of you. Call on the name of the Lord your God, but do not light the fire. So they took the bull given them and prepared it. Then they called on the name of Baal from morning till noon. O Baal, answer us, they shouted. But there was no response. No one answered. And they danced around the altar they had made. At noon, Elijah began to taunt them. Shout louder, he said. Surely he is a god. Perhaps he is deep in thought, which a cruder translation would say, perhaps he's on the pot. He's going to the bathroom. Is more literally what that's trying to say. Or busy or traveling. Maybe he is sleeping and must be awakened. So they shouted louder and slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. Midday passed, and they continued their frantic prophesying until the time for evening sacrifice. But there was no response. No one answered. No one paid attention. And I think a lot of times our relationship with God looks so much more like the prophets of Baal than it does Elijah. You see, we beg God and we plead God and we ask him for things that we want, fervently making dramatic gestures and claims, begging him what we want, you know, trying to bargain with God. I mean, look what they did. They would hurt themselves, physically hurt themselves, to show their God what would happen if God didn't show up and help them. You know, like a kid throwing a temper tantrum. I'm going to hold my breath if you don't do what I want. I mean, go back to 28 with me. So they shouted louder, slashed themselves with swords and spears, as was their custom, until their blood flowed. And then I quote, this is just so sad to me. They were taking knives, they were taking swords and cutting open their arms, cutting open their legs, and bleeding for this God who didn't care and wouldn't answer. And it was their custom. They did this. This wasn't a one-time thing. And if you saw the time there, morning to noon to evening, cutting themselves, bleeding, trying to get the attention of their God that would give them nothing. And I quote, but there was no answer, no one paid attention, and no one said anything. I mean, who would bleed and cut themselves and suffer so much for God that wouldn't respond to that or take any notice? You know, this is a pretty bizarre story. We don't feel like it relates very much. So much of the Old Testament is that way, but if we dig a little deeper, we notice it does. I mean, okay, we're about to talk Justin Bieber, so you can cover your ears if you want. So I'm really sorry if there's any fans out there, but as many of you probably know, Justin Bieber was this big boy band icon kind of guy, and he took this turn for the worse and started spiraling out of control into like this big pit of self-inflicted pain and just destroying everything he touched, and kind of just the turn a lot of celebrities take. Now, so many of these girls were so in love with Justin Bieber that they saw this and they hurt for him, and they started a movement where these girls, these kids, would cut themselves and take pictures, take videos, and put it online to show that they were hurting themselves while he hurt himself. And if he saw that their pain and saw the pain that they were going through for him, he would stop and step back. And that was their logic, and that was their thing. And this got to be a pretty big movement. You would think that there would be a comment from his people, that he would say something, post something, a statement or something, but there was nothing. They bled for their God, but he didn't take notice because he didn't even care. Now, what kind of gods do we bleed for? Because we do. Every single day, we take things, we make them gods, and we cut ourselves, and we suffer, and we bleed for these things. I mean, take our jobs. We bleed for our jobs. We cut ourselves open, we bleed, and we give, and we give, and we give, and they don't even notice how much we've given. Or relationships where we cut ourselves open, and we give away our purity, and we give away a piece of ourselves, only to have it fall short. Or the gods of materialism where we take that and we just cut, and we cut, and we cut, only to be completely unsatisfied a few months later. Brothers and sisters, we bleed for our gods just as much as these people did in this day. While there might not be physical blood, we feel the pain, and we keep giving, but there is no response, no one answers, and no one pays attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come here to me." They came to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord, which was in ruins. Elijah took 12 stones, one for each of the tribes descended from Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Your name shall be Israel." With the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he dug a trench around it large enough to hold 2 seahs of seed. He arranged the wood, cut the bull into pieces, and laid it on the wood. Then he said to them, "Fill 4 large jars with water, and put it on the offering and on the wood." "Do it again," he said, and they did it again. "Do it a 3rd time," he ordered, and when they did it the 3rd time, the water ran down around the altar and even filled the trenches. One of the things we notice is that the altar had been destroyed. In Israel's rejection of God, they had destroyed the altar, and while the prophets of Baal had to make one new, Elijah went back and took the old stones, the stones that had originally been there, the stones that had originally been the altar, and just built it back from where it was. It was never gone. It was just dismantled. And so he takes that, he places the wood on it, he takes his bull, cuts it up, and puts that on it. And then he pours water on it, which is ridiculous. If you want your sacrifice to spontaneously combust and go on fire out of nowhere, why in the world would you put water on it? Over and over and over again. I mean, there's 4 large jars of water. They put each other 3 times, 12 large jars of water, which I think is funny because Elijah's a pretty cool guy. I think I would like Elijah. He kind of is messing with them a little bit and picking at them because they're in a drought. They're in a drought, and he has them pour 12 large jugs of water on this thing that they're just going to set on fire. So I think he's kind of like messing with them a little bit too. But the point of this is that when this sacrifice catches on fire, there will be no doubt in any one of those hundreds of people there, no doubt in their minds how it happened, and that God was back in Israel, and that God was back in charge, and that they were going to have to change. You pour 12 large gallons of water on this fire pit outside, and then try to set it on fire, good luck. I've tried to do it in the rain. It's been raining all summer. But when it happens, you know that God is there, and you know that God is working. 36. At the time of the sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and prayed, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. Wow. I mean, this is not my prayer. This is not my prayer. If I'm Elijah, I'm standing here praying, Dear God, please set this on fire so they don't kill me. I don't want to look like an idiot. I don't want to die. Please, 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 please set this on fire. Once again, for me. But that's not what Elijah is concerned about. Elijah gets up here and starts talking about God. God, make yourself known. God, renew your reputation with these people. God, turn these people's hearts back to you. And I don't pray like that. I don't think I'm alone. We want that, but we're mostly concerned about things for us. Don't let me look like an idiot. Don't let me die. But Elijah says, let your reputation be known amongst these people. Turn their hearts back to you and show yourselves to them. I mean, what do we pray about in our quiet time? When we're alone and praying in our heads, what are our prayers? Mine are pretty selfish. And I think if we look at those times when we're praying by ourselves when no one's around, those show you what was really on your heart, what you really care about. And studying the story and preparing this for y'all, I mean, like, I've kind of been convicted a little bit to want to pray, to want more that God would be known, that God's will would last way before mine and way above mine. He prays for his reputation that it would be known. I mean, do we pray that the reputation of God would be known in our workplaces? That the reputation of God would be known in Centerville? That the reputation of God would be known in Dayton, in Ohio, in America? Because that's specifically the line that I've started praying and that I want to pray. Lord, may your reputation be known in Ohio. Lord, let your reputation be known in my family, with my friends, and overall. And lastly, what kind of strikes me here is Elijah's position. Go back, remember, this is a story, so let's try to picture how this would look. Imagine you're standing there. Elijah invited the people around him. He called them around him while he set up this altar, set up the sacrifice, and prayed. You see, what I see here is that we shouldn't respond to a lost and broken culture by picketing them, by blogging them, because what I see here in Elijah and in so many other examples in the Bible is that he stands in the midst of the people for the sake of the people. Elijah stands in the midst of the people for the sake of the people. You know, we should, I believe, stand beside those family members, those friends, our children, all those around us who don't know God. We should stand among them, praying that their hearts be turned back to God. This is my last little bit to read. This is 38 and 39. Then the fire of the Lord fell and burned up the sacrifice. The wood, the stones, and the soil also licked up the water in the trench. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. Now, the fire of the Lord, so many times in the Bible, represents, one, the presence of God, that God is close, and the power of God, His strength. And I would love to see that fall in Centerville. I would love to see that fall in Ohio. The presence and the power of God. God felt near and God felt strong. And I want the people I know, the people of this world, the people of this country, to bow down and say, The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God. And I think that's what happens when we honor God and we walk in His ways, but we also don't give up on those who have turned their back on Him. And we fight for the reputation of God amongst those who have turned their back on God. Now, this story is kind of familiar, right? I mean, one, we might have heard this story before, but it sounds like another. There's a mount flowing with water amidst the blood, with mockery and sacrifices. But, you know, this idea that I'm thinking of, it wasn't Mount Calvary. I mean, it wasn't Mount Carmel where the people had turned their back on God, but Mount Calvary. And this time, the people weren't bleeding for their God, but God was bleeding for His people. You know, we can spend our whole lives bleeding for these different gods we put up in our life, these different things that are only going to leave us unanswered and unloved. Or we can come to the one God who chose to bleed for his people. If you want that today, if you want to come and live for a God who'd rather bleed for you than you bleed for him, we invite you to come do so as we stand and sing.